everybody. Welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're looking at us on our YouTube channel, our now money-making YouTube channel, I think I checked this morning. We're like at $3. So, yeah,
Nice.
I'm feeling pretty good about this. And I'm your political host, Will Wright. I'm joined by my always faithful pastor, Josh Bertram, your faithful host. What's up, Josh?
Trying to be faithful, Will.
and this week we are honored to have with us Michael Ware. It's Ware, right? Ware. Okay. the founder and president, CEO of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, a nonpartisan nonprofit institution based in the nation's capital with the mission to contend for the credibility of Christian resources in public life. Michael directed faith outreach for President Obama's historic 2012 reelection campaign and was also one of the youngest White House staffers in modern American history. I feel like that's going to be a Jeopardy question one of these days.
Yes.
Don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, now Michael's out with a new book. It's called The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation, and the Renovation of Public Life. And we're just so happy to have you, Michael. So, yeah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, so great to be with you.
on.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's start off first by maybe just explaining to us, a little bit about how you got into the work that you do. Take us back to the beginning of kind of your career in politics, faith-based initiatives. What sort of motivated you to to work in this space?
Yeah. So, without telling my life story, but it's kind of hard. I became a Christian when I was 15 after being handed a tract of Romans, and it changed my life. I was interested in civics. After I gave my life to Jesus, I thought, well, now I need to go to seminary, become a pastor. You just want to do like the most Christian thing you could think of.
Sure.
And thankfully, I had a pastor in my life who said, Michael, look around. There are Christians who aren't pastors. And I thought that is a great observation, and praise God for that. And so very early in my life, the question, the vocational question, was, what does it mean to be faithful in and with public things? And that's been the through line of my career and much of my life. That led me to DC. As you said, I ended up working in the White House. Worked on presidential campaigns. In the White House, I was working in what was then the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And so I had the honor and privilege and blessing to work with religious leaders, organizations, and others who were serving communities in need and also helping the president navigate religious issues and relationships. And so I did that. And for the last decade or so, I've been helping Christian leaders, organizations, philanthropic organizations navigate public life. And I was doing that up until founding this nonprofit that we launched a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I'm curious, how much did your time in the White House really kind of shape your perspectives, and maybe even influence the book that you just recently wrote?
Oh, a great deal. I mean, it's one thing to have ideas about politics. It's another to see how those ideas play out, not just in public, but how decisions get made and be a part of making some of those decisions and to face the pressures. I think there's a lot of sort of hypothetical, oh, well, if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't be doing what they're doing. Then you get in those roles and you understand, oh, they, on the positive side, they have access to information and are considering a range of factors that I just wasn't privy to before. I should have a lot more grace for the constraints, and sometimes these aren't yes, there can be the well, this donor, we might lose this donor, but oftentimes it's, well, if we spend money, if we move forward with this program, if we try to pass this piece of legislation, we might not. It may burn bridges. That means that we can't pass this piece of legislation, and so there are all kinds of trade-offs involved. The other thing you recognize, though, and this really goes to the heart of the new book, is that for as significant the responsibility and the decision-making power that office holders and policymakers have, and they should be held accountable and all that. I am convinced through my experience and through my understanding of reality that the state of our politics is, in the end, a reflection of the state of our souls. That the kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics we have. And if we let, as citizens, as Christians, as Americans, if we let ourselves off the hook for the limited, but the only contribution, we can only contribute what we have to contribute. And if we are taking responsibility over the limited responsibility that we have, then maybe it's not so right to be spending so much time critiquing people with responsibility that is not ours to have or steward or control. And so this book is about how spiritual formation, the kind of people we are, has the capacity to transform not just our politics, but more importantly, in many ways, our own lives, the lives of our families, the life of the church.
That's so cool. I think about, we think about the intersection of faith and politics all the time on this show. And we have this, I want to call it like a myth in America that somehow, religion and politics don't mix, that they're not like back and forth with each other constantly.
Yes.
It's like these two forces that are hitting each other constantly, and we're always finding ourselves in some kind of place where now religion and the deeply held beliefs of any individual or group of people finds itself in some way either in conflict or trying to support the local party and or the major party, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, you think about Trump and how he has really pushed into the evangelical, especially white evangelical vote and presented himself as a believer and all these things in order to maybe certainly garner more votes, get people to care for him. I kind of think that he really I think he likes the guy from North Korea so much because the guy figured out how to get people to worship him as a god. And I think that I think that's why Trump likes the Rocket Man so much, is because he's like, wow, that's amazing that they made this happen. But in all seriousness though, you have Trump who speaks at, the Pastor Robert Jeffrey's First Baptist Church. You have Biden, who recently goes and speaks at the church in Charleston, where that ruthless white supremacist killed those 9 people. It's just horrible tragedy. Is there a difference between Trump going there and preaching at Robert Jeffrey's First Baptist Church and Biden going to the church, the AME church in Charleston? Is there a difference? And if so, what is the difference? What kind of role do you think presidents should play in this kind of religious mix that we have?
Okay, you raised so much in that question that I know. Let me put a pin in a couple things. So you referenced the separation between the way that we, and I'm not talking about the legal sort of principles, but just the way that we separate in our minds, sort of politics as this area of life that's cordoned off from God, and just sort of totally. And I have a chapter in the book that talks about the philosophical power that I think is quite misleading, and not of the separation of church and state and the work that that does philosophically, not legally. And then the second thing is, I think our conception of the gospel and what the gospel is has a great deal to do with that. And so I cover both in the book, and happy to talk more about that. But folks, entire chapters about those subjects. I think they're vital, and I think if you start the conversation with Trump and with politics, and you don't do some context setting, not in this conversation, just generally as we're thinking about faith and politics, then we're going to miss a great deal. So I'm so glad that you raised these more, I think, fundamental issues regarding sort of politics in the church and politics in the pulpit. You know, it's interesting. I'm working on something right now. Because I have started to ask just in the most recent days whether whatever I thought or whatever was right before, whether we're in a political environment now which requires that we reassess how we think about some of these things. And so I'll just say I'm unsettled on the question now. I think it might be time for reassessment because of how toxic our politics has become, and what the kinds of emotions and vitriol that people bring to politics. So I'll say that. The other thing I'd say is I don't think that there is one sort of faithful approach to politics generally when you get to the specifics. But even when you get to how a church engages politics, I think that there are all kinds of reasons, theology, you know, broadly construed. So not, you know, whether you believe Jesus rose from the grave, but sort of theological perspective, history, the context of the church, that should and does influence these decisions. There are some churches where a politician can't speak for any reason at any time. They don't allow anybody but the pastor to speak, really. There are other churches where there's a time during the service where folks in the community can sort of bring things for community consideration. And so I'm very careful about laying down all these hard and fast rules, and then you know, you poke at it a few times and all these things that sounded super confident are actually a lot more complicated. I think it's I think it's very complicated. What I will say is that churches need to be, here's my general principle. Churches need to make sure that they are not being used as simply a vehicle for the ambitions of politicians. Too often the church is literally the only body in the country that will host politicians and not ask them anything. They could speak on whatever they want to speak. They could read off the scripture on the note card that their staffer gave them 5 minutes before that they'd never heard of before, and they could make a, whether it's implicit or explicit, their sort of vote for me pitch, and then they have no idea what the people in that church care about. There's no accountability there, but the church is just sort of this captive audience of potential voters, and sometimes with the motivation of just being hospitable, sometimes just because you go, well, this is a local, you know, this is a person of influence. Should we really say no to them? When these politicians go to the NRA, the NRA has a questionnaire for them. When they go to speak at the Rotary Club has a questionnaire for them. they're speaking on the topic the hosting organization wants to hear from. The church is sometimes the only place where politicians could say whatever they want, never have to answer a question, and never be tested in any way. And that's what I'm really cautious about. We want to be really careful about the church as a political marketplace, where the politician is the one. Well, so we ought to be careful with that. Generally, we also need to be careful about the politician being the only one with any buying power, so to speak. And I think that's a lot of what we've seen.
Yeah, what I like about your book, and because of sort of the topics that we sort of swim in, or the waters we swim in, we read a lot of different books specifically focus on faith, politics, Christian nationalism, etc. Your book isn't necessarily the same, or it isn't in necessarily the same category. Instead, I think your book is. I could almost argue that your book could be sort of like a devotion in some regards, because it doesn't necessarily try to split parties or anything like that, and you use very broad terms. Even your mentions of Donald Trump are fairly limited, and are just sort of used to kind of like maybe engage with the reader or talk about the next point. And there's one excerpt on your book that I want to read if I can.
Sure.
It says, for nearly a decade now, conversations about faith and politics have been dominated by Donald Trump and the evangelical response to him. However, our political dysfunction did not begin with Donald Trump. Although his rise caused many to reevaluate their own approach to politics, many Christians now embrace the identifier of politically homeless. This is an improvement over a view that Christians must necessarily belong to any particular party as a matter of faithfulness. But it misses the point. It suggests a nostalgia for a time in the past when supposedly it was obvious which political party deserved the support of all Christians. And then this line is the thing that kind of got me. It says, we must understand that the crisis today is not that Christians are now politically homeless, but rather that they ever thought they could make their home in politics at all. Which is like, I mean, that'll preach.
Yeah, it's real good.
Definitely. So I want to kind of, get your response to that passage in the book, and maybe just talk a little bit more about, what you've seen that kind of helped inform this particular paragraph.
Yeah. And there is a conservative theologian who, y'all can cut it if you want to, and really I want to judge you for that. I don't, depending on what you want to. Al Mohler, who is the head of the largest, and I come up from a Southern Baptist background. I'm grateful for so many aspects of Al Mohler's contribution. He's been a real flip-flopper on Trump. He sort of said he'd never vote for Trump, and then he said everybody has to. I mean, he's sort of been all over the map on this. Yes. At one point, when he was trying to, he understood that he upset a lot of Trump supporters by saying that he wouldn't support Trump. And as he was trying to backtrack from this and revise his position, he said something completely fascinating. And he said this as if it was a positive thing. He said, look, you need to understand that up until 2016, I never had to devote an ounce of moral energy to thinking about who I voted for. And by that, he meant it was so morally clear. I didn't have to provide. And this is one of the leading ethicists and worldview in all of evangelicalism, saying I didn't have to devote an ounce of moral energy to thinking about who I voted for. I voted just straight Republican over and over again because I'm that great of a guy. I voted straight Republican, and it was only in 2016 that I even had to think about it. So in other words, you can trust me. 2016, I got a little confused. It was disorienting. But I was always straight Republican with no tension, not an ounce of moral energy needed, and I'm back to being that way now. And what I want to say is, I'm not. It's fine that he voted straight Republican, but the Christian ought to bring some tension into the ballot box with them. If you think the choices in our politics over and over and over again are so clear that not an ounce of moral energy is needed, when you could say that, when you know that, typically about half of Catholics vote for the other party. The Catholic vote is split. Typically, mainline Protestants are 60-40 either way. Typically, black Christians are voting 80-20, 90-10 for the Democratic Party. White evangelicals are voting 75-80% for the Republican Party. So no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, you want to look all those Christians in the face and say what didn't require an ounce of moral energy for me is what many of you made a completely different position than. So in other words, if you spent any moral energy at all making your decision, it was ill spent. You had nothing to think about. That is, we can do a lot better. And so the idea here is, Christians do not take their marching orders from political parties. And if you're, if you find yourself agreeing with, if your political views align with every jot and tittle of a party platform, which, by the way, these party platforms change every 4 years, sometimes in completely contradictory ways. So to say that you supported a party for over the course of 30, 40 years without dedicating, do you know how many different positions the Republican Party has had on immigration over the last 40 years? So what you're saying is that issue itself requires no moral energy at all, because they've had the Democratic Party has changed too. So this idea that, as a faithful Christian, I just stand for whatever my political party wants me to stand for. Whenever they tell me to clap, I clap, and whenever they tell me to sit down, I sit down. That's not biblical worldview thinking.
No.
That's not faithfulness. That's a shriveled moral imagination. When Christians have all the resources available to us to bring from outside of politics a moral imagination that is richer and truer than anything our politics is providing, for the service of our communities and for the benefit of our politics, the worst thing that we could do is take our moral imaginations from the limited resources politics has to offer. We'll be shortchanging ourselves and our politics itself.
That's so good. When you're talking, I'm thinking about my own journey. I used to listen to Al Mohler essentially every day for years and years. And the idea that, at this point, again, that, like you said really well, that it never required moral imagination it's indicative of what I grew up with. Not even intentionally. My parents didn't intend this. I don't think necessarily the pastors intend this, but the idea that in order to be a good Christian, you need to be a good American. And in order to be a good American, you need to be a good Christian. And we have taken these things and married them so closely together that now that we're separating them, right, where parts of us are getting ripped apart on either side, right? It hurts. It's painful because we don't know how to handle
Yes.
this, because we've been under an illusion that somehow we are in the right to have political party, to use political power and all of that in order to gain what we want. And it's funny because we see ourselves, I hear so many sermons, and I've heard so many sermons on the Pharisees growing up and how Jesus was against the Pharisees. And we are the exact culture that Jesus came into and had to preach against. And Trump and MAGA Republicans, and not just MAGA Republicans, any Republicans, so many of us, we would have crucified Jesus long, long ago. He's way too radical. He pushes us way too beyond our boundaries. We don't like the way that he loves people. We don't want love to win. The thing that makes us more angry than anything else is when love wins, because that means that person got to do whatever they wanted, and we had to live in this tight jacket of spiritual disciplines and all this stuff. We had to force ourselves, and then those pagans get to do whatever they want. Of course, we need political power. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and ask a question here, but it's like, so obviously, right, there's a reason why these two things intertangle so deeply, politics and religion. I have my own thoughts on that. I would love to hear your thoughts from your perspective on why is it that politics and religion, even when we thought for so long we've separated them, and we're justified, clearly they're not separated at all. Clearly they're tied together, and now things are being exposed, and we don't like it, and we're upset about it, and now the power is shifting, and now it's making Christians really upset. What is going on? I mean, I'm sure it always has at some level for certain Christians. I'm thinking about mainline evangelical, Christianity. What is it that makes politics and spirituality so closely intertangled that when we just either bunch them together or try to separate them without nuance, it creates such deep issues?
Yeah. So very good question. Again, there's a lot there. First thing I want to say is, right, I think it's, and I just want to be, and maybe this will be a bit surprising, but I've been pretty insistent that it is not, folks who voted for Trump or vote for Republicans are not de facto unfaithful.
Absolutely.
And a part of what rightly situating our politics means is not baptizing our own political opinions and having some imagination for the different way that different people faithfully arrive at political conclusion, even if you'd argue that prudentially they're missing some information or that they've missed a step. It is not a sin to have the wrong politics, so to speak, necessarily. So that's vital. To your point about politics and faith being close together, I think some ways, yes. In other ways, I'm struck by all of the ways in which we act and proceed as if faith has and ought not have anything to do with politics, particularly a faithful logic. So you can't tell me that the problem with folks who will stand up in a church and clap when when Donald Trump's son goes into a church and says, "Look, I know you people have this love your enemies stuff, but that just doesn't work in politics." And you could try to do that in your personal life, whatever, but if you try and do that in politics, I promise you're going to get steamrolled. So just let us take care of that. You can't tell me that the problem with that crowd clapping for that is that their faith and their politics are too closely aligned. No, actually, the problem there is that they actually don't trust that Jesus' way holds up in politics.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly the temptation that's being put in front of them. You can't trust Jesus when he says that the world is a safe place and politics is a safe place the world is a safe place in which to follow him. Maybe he'll get you to heaven, but in life as it is now, you really need to take control yourself, and you better be looking out for yourself because no one else is going to look out for you. So again, the problem there is not, these Christian nationalists, they're just everything they do is motivated by Scripture. No, they're explicitly setting aside the words of Jesus because they're saying politics. It's this whole other realm. So I have a chapter in the book about what. So I should say this: the book is applying the ideas of Dallas Willard, who was a philosopher, Christian author. He wrote The Divine Conspiracy, Spirit of the Disciplines, Renovation of the Heart, applying Willard's ideas to politics and public life. And Willard had this idea of, he called them gospels of sin management. And the idea here is he talks about a barcode faith, by which he's referring to like the scanner. He says some people talk about the gospel as if God is this cosmic scanner, and so long as you have the right barcode, so long as you have the right label slapped on you, you're God. The cosmic scanner doesn't care what's really in the package. So long as you have the right barcode on, you'll go to the good place, and everyone else will go to the bad place. And this is developed in such a way. He says that you could have the worst kind of character possible. Because you provide mental assent to a few lines of doctrine, you'll go to the good place, and others will go to the bad place. And he says this is developed to the extent where, as is widely recognized, there's nothing we could say about the difference of character between someone who's a Christian and someone who's not a Christian. This has crept into, affected, in some ways defines the relationship between faith and politics, as we've seen play out, not just in the last 8-10 years, but over time. So I guess what I want to say is I want to, yes, there are ways in which, especially like institutionally and, the alignment of political powers and institutions, that you have some groups that have relationships with conservative churches, you have other groups that have relationship with progressive churches, and they sort of work in tandem, and there's certainly that happening. But there are other ways in which we don't think the two have anything to do with one another. And that's not an imposition from the secular world alone. That's something that Christians themselves import into politics with us.
Well, I mean, forking shirt balls. Since you invoked the good place, I wanted to at least give one of my
That's good.
I'm curious about sort of the timing of your book. I mean, one of the things that I think is really, really fascinating is that none of this seems to be a new phenomenon.
Yes.
If you read like Greg Boyd's books, especially like The Myth of a Christian Nation, Myth of a Christian Religion, like he wrote these books back in like 2004.
Yeah, that's right.
and I'm curious, like, is the book that you wrote, The Spirit of Our Politics, is this a book you feel you would have written if Trump never made it into the White House?
Yes. This book, you were very right to say this book is not about Donald Trump. It's not about Joe Biden. I wrote this book because I believe that spiritual formation is central to civic renewal. And I think the fate of this country is inextricably linked to the character of Christianity in this country. More than that, I see, and you all talk about on this show all the time, the ways in which politics is impacting and shaping and disrupting the life of the church. And so this is my, after 15 years in politics, public life, this is the best constructive effort I can muster about where to go from here. And my hope is that this book is empowering for Christians. There's a chapter in the book specifically addressed to pastors and parents because of, I think, the special roles they have when it comes to formation. Part of the problem that Christians face when we think about politics is we think that to participate in politics means to take up a wholly separate set of knowledge and language and disposition than anything the church could offer. And so I'll talk to pastors who say, well, I'm trying to, I understand now that politics is, can't be kept out entirely out of the four walls of the church, because in America, at least, where we have political lives, we have political duties. Citizens can't choose whether to have political influence; they already have it. And so, I'm trying to get more involved in politics. And so, I've been reading the polls lately, and I'm really getting into presidential polling. And like that, it's fine to an extent. But what I want to say is, your church does not need you to be what they need from you when it comes to political formation for public life is not that you're up to date on New Hampshire polling. You have resources as what Willard called a spokesperson for Christ, as someone whose role is to represent and advance knowledge about reality in the kingdom of the heavens to your church and really to the community in which God has placed you. And that's what our politics needs. Now, that requires, yes, understand how politics functions, understand the difference between how the local church operates and how a city council has to operate. I'm not saying, be ignorant about your political institutions, but Willard defines joy as a pervasive and constant sense of well-being. And at my events over the last 7-8 years, I've asked people, how many of you would define our politics as full of a pervasive and constant sense of well-being? And it's a laugh line, right? But one of the things we could offer is, what would it mean to have joy in the midst of political strife? What would it mean for Christians to bring a presence of gentleness into politics? Is that realistic? And if you don't think it's realistic, why is that? And if you don't think it's realistic in politics, where else as Christians do you not think that gentleness and the fruit of the Spirit is possible? And then you get to questions of discipleship. Then you get to questions of formation. That's exactly where pastors should be. And so that's the heart of this book. And what I hope is, especially in an election year, that it gives Christians a way to think about and approach this political season that is not discordant with the life of the church and with the life they're seeking to live with Jesus, but actually that they could find in politics one forum in which they're seeking to pursue faithfulness with Jesus that not just benefits our public life, but that is a part of their journey of faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, what's interesting is, and I'm glad you brought up about church leadership and pastors, because this has sort of been heavy on my heart in the sense of, I mean, I'm not a pastor, Josh is, but Christians, go to church to, be fed the word, learn about the Bible, theology, what have you. And a lot of, Christians that I see today, especially in my opinion, aren't necessarily living out the life that I think Jesus wants us to live, are getting that from somewhere. And the Bible uses a lot of imagery, shepherds and sheep, and I'm just like, if I fed my sheep candy all day, like, I'm going to get the results of a sheep eating candy. I would imagine as a shepherd, I would properly equip my sheep per se, to handle sort of to handle the world, to handle politics, to handle everything. So like, how much do you fault religious leaders, present company excluded, Josh, for the shape of our Christian witness in the world of politics today?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a conversation that I'd have with pastors one-on-one, and then I'm not here, and by here I don't mean on this podcast, but I'm not here to judge the church. It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing when you get folks, best case scenario, on Sundays for a 20-minute sermon, sometimes a 45-minute sermon, depending on your tradition, maybe sometimes, if you're Baptist, a little bit longer. Maybe you get them on a Wednesday for a Bible study. Meanwhile, they're absolutely soaked in a toxic political culture, but also, I have a chapter in the book on what Willard calls a disappearance of moral knowledge, which is basically what we just talked about, which is this idea that basically, to sort of bring it down, this idea that basically what we talk about in church is good for church, but it's not publicly available knowledge. And so folks are just soaking in this stuff, and even the most well-intentioned, thoughtful, strategic pastors are going to have trouble if they think their job is to get people to do things. If they think their job is to get people is to somehow coerce or somehow plan other people's behavior for them. People need to take responsibility for that themselves. Pastors are offering knowledge and a setting which is conducive to formation, which is conducive to discipleship. But I think we actually place far too much burden on pastors. As I talk with pastors, anything happens in the news, they're getting emails. If you don't talk about this on Sunday, I'm leaving the church. If you do talk about this on Sunday, I'm leaving the church. The pastor has been and the local church itself has become a forum for other people's advocacy as opposed to their service. People are going to the church to have their political beliefs affirmed, as opposed to going to the church. So I'll often tell pastors, and there are exceptions, but when you're being asked to speak on a political issue, it may be the right thing to do to speak on it, but just, and I hope this is an encouragement in some ways, but also like a reality check to pastors. It is very rare that the person asking that is doing so because they are just so eager to follow whatever perspective the pastor in discernment with Scripture and the Holy Spirit shares on that Sunday. No, more typically, what the person is trying to do is they're having a disagreement with someone in their small group about an issue, and what they want more than anything else is to be able to have the pastor come down on their side so that they could say, hey, look, you better keep your mouth shut. Pastor said I'm right, you're wrong, and that's that. And so we just need to be really careful. I will say this though. Willard wrote a book called The Great Omission. And I do think it's true. Pastors just need to take seriously in their own reflection whether the reason why they're not seeing greater formation into the likeness of Christ in their church is because it has anything to do with whether they are preaching a gospel that is likely to lead to greater formation into Christ-likeness. And again, to go to the conversation we were having, if you're preaching a gospel that says that Jesus's message is about what happens after you die entirely, if you're preaching a gospel that says, so long as you provide mental assent to these few lines of doctrine, then you're in, and anything else is justification by works. And any discussion of how you might become less angry, how you might deal with anger in your life, how you might deal with envy in your life, if you try to make any effort in that direction, that's justification by works. Then yes, you're actually putting people in a box in which, as Paul writes about, Paul says, "For you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator." Well, if the gospel we're preaching is that happens without any effort at all, any will at all on behalf of, you just have to sort of wait for it to, you raise your hand in an auditorium and then you're just sort of waiting to be transformed. That's not the vision for formation or just for Christian life that's laid out in the New Testament. But because we're so worried about all these different debates and not falling into this camp or the other, we put ourselves in some pretty tight corners.
Yes, we absolutely do. There's a church I was at, and one of the churches that I worked with, and there was someone who came up to me after church on Sunday, and they were leaving, and maybe it wasn't after church, but I had this conversation with them, and they're like, "Well, this church isn't political enough."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And what they meant was that it isn't, to use shorthand, it isn't MAGA enough. Now, it wasn't, it was just then coming out in 2016, and it was probably before that actually, but there's a sense that you're not political enough. And what was meant is you're not talking about the things that we need to talk about. You're not fighting the evil of the Democratic Party. Literally, that's what it means. Other people had told me, yeah, Hillary Clinton is demon possessed. We know this. And these were pastors saying these kinds of things. And I know that that's not very rare. I wish it was, but it's not. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, what in the world is going on with us on the one hand? And then on the other hand, I understand how people can look at issues that are really close to their heart, things like abortion, things like same-sex marriage, things like the entire LGBTQ issues within the church, QIA, issues within the church. I can see how people would look and see that the way in which we spend our money is a reflection of our values and the unbelievable amount of debt that this country has. in the trillions and trillions and trillions, unimaginable, incomprehensible numbers to most people, and really just in general. These massive amounts of debt, and then looking at what the Bible says about debt and saying, man, this is a terrible, this government is terrible. It needs to follow biblical principles. I can relate to that because I felt that before.
Yes.
And I felt the fear. I felt the fear that the country that I knew and loved it's leaving, and it's like sand through the fingers. I can't get it. I can't hold on to it. There's just this little bit, and I'm going to hold on to it as close as I can. And I'm going to fight for it. Or the revolutionary pastor that sometimes you have to preach to your sheep and sometimes you must defend them from the wolves. Wolves being the British. And we're going to fight them and kill them, which is like, wait, what? Okay, so I can see some of that stuff. I can relate to that. How do we actually walk this line trying to be bipartisan, right? Because I always heard, well, you're neither Christian doesn't mean you're Democrat or Republican, but it really did mean that you're Republican. And
right.
then now it's like in recent times, they're just saying it. Like, no, you're either, if you're Christian, you're a Republican in America. That's the only way you can be a faithful Christian. They're not even trying to pretend anymore. And I'm just wondering, how do we walk with these issues that we do feel like, because some people feel like, man, Christ's heart breaks over the millions of aborted children, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into the debate here. We have a great series on that people can go look at on the podcast. But my point is not to jump at one particular side of this, which I think is more nuanced than most people imagine. But I am definitely, you could categorize me as pro-life, but I don't like that label. Anyway, how do you actually walk in this? Because there are some really important issues that people are like, yeah, it feels like the Bible's really clear about this. Why can't we should be able to voice our opinion. We should be able to get people in there who represent righteousness and the way in which a country aligns with principles, godly principles, the more blessed they will be. And God, dethrones and puts on leaders on the throne. The Bible's clear. How do we how do we walk this line? How have you done that? How have you seen that done well?
Yeah. Well, first, first I want to, you said a couple things at the end there. I was ready to almost completely affirm what you said, and then you used a couple examples that I want to poke at a bit. But folks who would say, I look, the Scripture motivates me to care about this issue and for this to be whatever the issue is, for this to be a driving issue for me in politics and to be a deciding issue for me. I think that could be a good thing. You can't care about everything. There's no perfect equation to somehow. There's no perfect equation at which you sort of like can put in every political factor and then. Oh, you are 53%. You are 53% most likely to support this candidate. No, like people are trying to make decisions with imperfect information. Here's what I'd say: know that your information is imperfect. Know that your priorities don't have to be the priorities of everybody else, to the exclusion of there being, and that Christians with different priorities than you being de facto unfaithful. This is going to sound incredibly subtle, but I think just this shift would make a huge difference in our politics. If instead of saying, I hold this, I hold this position because I'm a Christian. Or because I'm a Christian, I hold this position. To say, my my faith or this tenet of scripture, this theological principle motivates me to hold this position. That may sound identical, but the difference between the two is that the second makes explicit the translating work that we're doing in the prudential realm of politics. It makes clear that we are trying to translate ultimate truth and ultimate principles into the prudential realm of politics, as opposed to pretending like there's no translation work happening and that we are just these basically stenographers for the political will of God, and perfect ones at that. We ain't got no typos. You know, our transcriptions are perfect. That would transform our politics. The last, maybe not the last thing, because there are some scenarios where it might be a better outcome than others. But the last thing I want to do is tell Christians, or you don't bring your values. What other values are they supposed to vote on? And like who what other source are they supposed to draw from as they're making decisions other than themselves and their own, like we try to get people in all these impractical. Of course, people need to apply their beliefs into politics. What we need to do is understand, for instance, that the history of public policy in this country is a history of unintended consequences. So, like, for instance, like what does, I don't know if I want to, let me keep it general to say, it's one thing, like sometimes our intentions aren't even the right ones. And we learn that. We learn, hey, I used to think this was, this ought to have been I used to think this should have been the center of Christian politics. Now I realize not only is it not the center, but I was wrong about the whole thing. It wasn't just that I prioritized it too much. It was that I was wrong on the issue. But even if our intentions are right, our ability to know what political instruments, what policy instruments best advance our intentions is quite faulty, quite faulty. So we think that we're improving education in this country, but you pass. I'll give two examples. There are people who said, if we don't pass No Child Left Behind, and remember, No Child Left Behind was a bipartisan legislation. If we don't pass No Child Left Behind, or if you oppose No Child Left Behind, you don't want our children to be educated. But that was under George W. Bush. Under Obama, there was a program called Race to the Top. If you don't support Race to the Top, you don't support public education in this country. Well, what happens even in that prudential area? What happens when you stake your political positions on sort of, if you care about this issue, you'll support this policy, and if you don't support this policy, you don't care about this issue. What if that policy doesn't work exactly as you intended it to make? What if it even harms the very thing you're trying to help? What if, and I'll just go there, what if the ultimate outcome of overturning Roe v. Wade is that we actually end up with a more liberal abortion regime than we had with Roe? Who's responsible for that? We're so willing to cast these hard and fast moral judgments, but then when our own approach ends up failing by the very own criteria we set for others, then all of a sudden it's excuses and well, how could I have known? Well, that's exactly the point. This isn't to say, yes, bring your convictions in politics. Just understand that political convictions do not amount to the way, the truth, and the life. That your political convictions should not be, you should be very careful about claiming, as C.S. Lewis wrote, claiming God hath said when he hasn't spoken. But we have a politics right now. The easiest way that you could get Christians to support, or this works for a whole number of groups, right? Like we have a politics right now we aren't even making actual arguments anymore. It's just, if you're a real one of whatever it is, you'll vote my candidate. And if you don't support for my candidate, you're not a real one. You're not a real Christian. You're not a real blue collar worker. You're not a real Black American. You're not a real Hispanic American. You're not a real Italian. Whatever it is. But like, so it's all this identitarian ploy, which works really well for political candidates and parties, because they get to hold whatever position they want, and they get to put it under the guise of just being a real one. Well, let's be a little careful about our judgments about what's what makes for a real one or not.
That's true. So my last question, your book, what is your ideal takeaway for readers of it? And maybe rephrasing the question a little bit, like who do you hope to reach, and what impact do you envision coming out of the reader's experience reading it?
Yeah. I hope to reach churches, pastors, parents, Christian college students, whether you're at a Christian college or a secular school. I hope that this book, I think that there's a lot of important work to do about sort of analyzing how we got here, and I've been involved in those conversations. We need to think about where we're going and what we're taking with us. And that's why I wrote this book. So I hope this book is a service to the church, and through the church to the public. And I hope people leave reading this book feeling like feeling empowered, and feeling like there is something that, like this next year, and really just their engagement with politics in the coming years isn't just about warding off and trying to make it through somehow, and just trying to mitigate the damage, but actually this is an opportunity for you to contribute, for you to grow, for you to be formed, for your churches, your families, your communities to actually be healthier on the other side of it.
That's awesome. Well, Michael, how can people get a hold of you, learn more about what you're doing, your organization? Just spend the next couple seconds or minutes just giving us all your I don't know, marketing stuff.
Sure. So the book is The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life. And you could get that at wherever you like to get your books. You can learn more about the Center for Christianity and Public Life at ccpubliclife.org, and would love to have folks engaging with the work we're doing. And then you can follow me on social media. I'm on X at Michael R. Ware, and on Instagram at Michael Ware, and would love to touch base with folks on those platforms.
That's really great. Just for the record, I still call X Twitter because their URL is still Twitter.
It still works. It still works. And so, I'll always be nostalgic for Twitter. But yeah, no, that's right.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much, Michael, for stopping by. This has been an amazing conversation. Make sure you all are buying the book, The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life. This is Michael Ware. And thanks to our Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. And remember, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you next time. Take care. All right.